Good evening and welcome to Vision. I am the Reverend Martin O'Connor.
Thanks be to God for His bounty and beauty, life that sustains us in body and mind, plenty for all if we learn how to share it, riches undreamed of to fathom and find. Long have our human wars ruined its fathers. Long has earth bowed to the terror of foes. Long have we wasted what others have needed, poisoned the fountain of life at its source. Earth is the Lord's, it is ours to enjoy it, ours as God's stewards to farm and defend, from its pollutions, misuse and destruction. Good Lord, deliver us, world without end.
That was the hymn, God in His Love for Us Lent Us This Planet, chosen by my guest this evening, Reverend David White. Perhaps, David, you tell us why you chose God in His Love for Us Lent Us This Planet.
Well, this hymn is one of the most challenging in the Church of Ireland hymnal, but it was written in the 1970s, so you could say that the person who wrote it, Fred Pratt Green, was ahead of his time. In 1970s, we weren't so aware of what was happening to our planet or what we were doing to our planet. And he was able to have the foresight to warn us and to encourage us to be better stewards. The stanza that stands out most for me is, "The earth is the Lord's, it's ours to enjoy it, ours as His stewards to farm and defend. From its pollution, misuse and destruction, good Lord, deliver us, world without end." Strong words and a real challenge to us in the here and now.
Especially at this creation time which we're in now. And creation time is an initiative of international churches. And like the hymn, it reminds us of God's creation and our responsibility and duty to take care of it. Now, before we start to discuss the environment, our responsibility to the planet and creation time, perhaps you would introduce yourself to our audience, just briefly.
My name is David White, and I'm the Church of Ireland rector in Zion Parish in Rathgar. I come from the Knoll in North County Dublin, and before ordination I trained and later worked in the National Botanic Gardens in Glasnevin. And horticulture and awareness of the environment is something that I see is very much part of my ministry.
Well, I'd say your work as a horticulturist gave you an insight into the link between our climate and healthy growth. So how does the way we live affect the environmental conditions needed for healthy growth?
I think one of the greatest insights I had in my training and background is that we're all connected. We're all part of the natural environment. Sometimes we think that we're separate from nature, but we're part of the ecosystem. So whatever we do, whatever we choose to do, whatever we choose not to do, has an impact. So it's really important to consider our choices and its impact on the rest of the natural world.
And it's not just our choices as communities and as governments, it's our choices as individuals and churches. So how would you see our choices improving our environmental impact?
Well, 10 years ago, I was ordained in the Church of Ireland, and one of the things that you're invited to do at that time is choose a verse to put on your invitation card and your ember card. And the verse I chose is from John's Gospel, when Jesus said that he came that we might have life and have it in abundance. And I think that gift of abundance is not just for human beings, it's for the whole of the natural world. And when we're thinking about our choices and the decisions that we make, that we need to think, am I a gift to the world? Is my choice a gift to the world? What is the impact of my choices going to be? So it's needs to be very much part of our faith, because if we believe that God made the world, well, then we have a huge challenge and opportunity then to be a blessing to the rest of the natural world.
And would you say, looking at what we've done to the world and the extinction of species and deforestation, to what extent have we failed?
Well, there's no question, and all we need to do is look at what's happening in various parts of the world in terms of flood and climate change and adverse weather. We have been bad tenants. We have been bad stewards. But of course, we can always turn a negative into a positive. And while we can look at the past and see that we haven't done as much as we ought to have done, now is the time to make good decisions and good choices as individuals and also as communities.
Well, what choices can we make, or should we make?
I think one of the greatest initiatives that I found in terms of our responsibility to the environment has been the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. It comes from the good people at the National Biodiversity Data Centre in Waterford. And they've produced a huge number of resources to help pollinators, because supporting pollinators is one of the most important things that we can do in terms of securing the future of the planet. But their guides and their brochures are hugely practical. They inspire action. And there is a whole variety of them for faith communities, for farms, for golf courses, for our own gardens, a whole range of them. And they're all available on their website, pollinators.ie. But one of the things they have is a page of actions, 24 actions that you can put into place. Because when you think about the environment and when you think about the climate crisis, it can seem huge and daunting. And that can lead to a kind of a fear, which can lead to a kind of paralysis. So the thing I think to do is to do something, no matter how small it is. And with the 24 actions that they're suggesting, it's not possible to implement all 24 straight away. But just to pick out one or two can be a good way to start as an individual or as a faith community to get going. But to start, there can be very daunting. But by starting small, at least you can start a momentum and an energy around whatever project you might be thinking of undertaking.
I think you're right. I think it was some Chinese philosopher said, the long march starts with a small step. So we have to just take the first step and work on from there. You were saying about the risk of paralysis. Now, I must admit that sometimes I feel that when I see one example was the enthusiasm the government had for opening the new runway at Dublin Airport to allow more and longer flights. And even in our own churches, the number of flights taken to conferences by clergy deters me. But a classic example was you may have been at the environmental conference in Drummondine. It was a great place to have an environmental conference, inaccessible by public transport. You know, so you mentioned that the small steps. What can you think of specifics?
Well, each individual has to look at their own situation and think about what does it mean to be ethically, to choose ethically. So in terms of shopping, for example, so we're in the middle of harvest time at the moment, and we're thinking about food. When we're buying our fruit and veg, where does it come from? For example, asparagus comes from thousands and thousands of miles away. Avocados are the same. So to think about the air miles that's associated with our food will be a very good start.
Well, I think we tend to forget the impact of air miles on our food. And I know there are campaigns around to shop local, but sometimes one of the problems is price. You know, locally produced food can be more expensive.
But this comes back then to choices. You know, if you want to live ethically, sometimes it's going to cost a little bit more. So where are you going to put your money? Where are you going to put your investment? And the other thing as well, of course, is thinking about people who produce food in faraway places. The fair trade movement is a reminder that some farmers are really struggling in faraway places and not getting fair prices for their food, and unfortunately are not in a position to farm sustainably because we expect cheap food. And cheap food means that someone is losing out along the line.
And on top of that, on top of the air miles, we tend to forget the deforestation that results when we try to get cheap food from countries like Brazil. And I think people may need to be a little more careful on labeling, because so many products include palm oil, which is having a horrendous effect on the environment in parts of Asia.
So when you ask the question about, what can people do something small, but make some kind of change. Even if you're able in a position to buy food without lots of plastic packaging, again, that's a step towards living ethically, because so much of our vegetables and fruit in particular are heavily packaged with plastic. And again, that's not good for our planet.
No, I know you are an enthusiast for eco-congregation, Ireland. Could you tell us what eco-congregation is and how churches and individuals could get involved?
They're a really interesting and dynamic organisation, made up of various denominations from right across the island of Ireland, and they're encouraging parishes to be more ethically aware. But there's four kind of strands to what they're encouraging: practical, spiritual, local, and global. So the practical is probably what we think of first. What changes can we make? Putting up bug hotels, planting biodiversity areas. And that's kind of the obvious thing that we can do in our parishes. The second then is the spiritual. So do we, in our churches, do we hear preaching about the environment? Do we mark creation time? Do we celebrate harvest? Do we have Plough Sunday at the beginning of the growing season? Do we, in our prayers, pray for the planet, pray for those involved in environmental work? The spiritual is important because, as I said earlier, we believe that God has made the planet. We have a responsibility to protect it and work for its welfare. But also to remember that we're not alone in this work, in that we are cooperating with our Creator God when we're involved in this work. And then the local. Can we involve local organisations in our parishes? So the men's sheds can be a really good resource. And the local county councils can be very supportive around these areas. So can we engage with local authorities and local community groups when we're working and developing these projects in our parishes? And then the global touches on what I was saying earlier, that are we aware of the impact of our choices on farmers and producers in faraway places? Can we support projects, for example, planting of trees in Africa, or the buying of beehives for farmers in the developing world? So those four strands that the Eco Congregation Ireland are encouraging. And there's various standards then, various awards then available for parishes as they're developing their initiatives. But the best place to start is going to their website, Eco Congregation Ireland. If you Google it, it'll come up. And they have a document, an environmental checkup for your church, which is a really helpful audit. And I know when we did it in my previous parish, we were very encouraged because we discovered, firstly, that we were doing a lot of the things already. So that was very encouraging. But secondly, we found that with small changes, we were able to improve improve our work and improve our life. For example, use of recycled paper, and there was one small change that we made straight away, and also around our choices in terms of buying fair trade tea and coffee. So it's a really good website and a really good organisation. And if people, faith communities want to get going, that's a really good place to begin.
And you mentioned harvests, and at Creation Time, I think is a very good time to have harvests. But I have a sense that harvest festivals have drifted a bit over the last few years.
Having come to Dublin, I think one thing I've been struck is how different harvest is. In my previous rural parish, we had mostly farmers in the congregation. So when you said harvest to them, they understood the nuts and bolts of harvest, that how difficult it can be. They understand what it means to grow things. Then Dublin 6 is a little different. So being here, they can feel a bit remote. But harvest, I think, is a really good time to think about creation, think about our responsibility to it, and then to decide what we're going to do as a faith community. It's all very well, like our harvest hymns, our beautiful hymns, but then what are we going to do? Our liturgy should prepare us for action. And Creation Time should be every time. I know we're more intentional about it this time of year, but really every Sunday should be Creation Sunday.
But it certainly should, and harvest is a great time to engage people with the whole issue of the environment and climate change. And we're seeing day by day the damage that climate change is doing to the world. And the regular appeals, there's an appeal for the famine in the Horn of Africa. And again, what you said about what we can do, but we have done it. We are responsible for what is happening in East Africa. We are responsible in our choices. I mean, do we really need bottled water from New Zealand or apples from New Zealand?
And that's the real tragedy, is that the people who will suffer most are the people who are least responsible for climate breakdown. Like, we in the West are responsible for climate breakdown, there are people suffering. So again, the practical support of charities like Christian Aid charity, I support, who are working with people on the ground, is really, really important to emphasize our global responsibility for choices that have been made more locally.
Well, yeah, but as I said earlier, sometimes I despair because the people who basically control most of the politics and economics in the world are just paying lip service to the idea of dealing with climate change. How can we change their mindset?
Well, I love the thing about that blame negates responsibility. I come back again and again and again. The greatest change comes about when I as an individual begin change, to model the kind of change that we want to see. Yes, our elected representatives need to be held accountable, but in a democracy, we have that opportunity every few years. But again, we need to come back to our own personal choices and decisions. And by modelling the kind of change that we want to see, we bring about that change by showing people a better way of being a good steward of creation.
Yes, that's very true. We are individually responsible for what we do and for the impact we have.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
What did you do in eco-congregation in your parish in Carlow, and how can you bring that forward?
Well, we began with a very small group of children, Sunday Club children, and they called the Sundays that they were working on their little project Wear Wellies to Church Sundays. And they began by simply planting a biodiversity area, putting up a book hotel then and some benches made by Carlow Men's Shed. And little by little, then the parents got more involved, and it gained a real momentum. We did the environmental checkup, looking at those 4 areas: practical, spiritual, local, and global. And we worked our way right up to a gold award. And the children were immensely proud for achieving that. But it started small. As I said earlier, start small, dream big. And it needs to be involved, to be as involved in the community as possible. But by starting, it was possible. If we had started to form a committee and started to develop strategy at the beginning, and we didn't. We just launched in and we did it. By using that All Ireland pollinator plan, that's how we began, and trying to implement some of the 24 actions that they have. And so we were very proud then to be awarded a gold award, and hopefully they'll continue their good work in Carlow now that I'm gone.
One of the things that frustrates me is the number of cars used for short distances. It's obviously more difficult in a rural parish like Carlow, but walk to church Sundays or bus to church Sundays might be a good idea.
Absolutely. It's all about our choices and decisions. But another thing is, when our elected representatives come around knocking on our doors, looking to be re-elected, how often do we ask them questions about the environment, ask them questions about the likes of the provision of public transport, even public transport in rural areas? It would be good. As I said, they need to be held to account because decisions at a national level need to be informed by local people being concerned for the environment.
And the whole question of public transport is easy to deal with in places like Dublin, Cork, and the big cities. But to say people should use public transport in rural Ireland when public transport is patchy, to say the least, is patronising.
It's certainly more challenging, but not impossible. There are rural link schemes in various parts of the country. But there needs to be a political will for that to happen, and that'll only happen if the electorate demand it of them.
Well, I don't know. It'll be probably around another 2 years so before we get that opportunity, as things are planned at the moment. So we will have a fairly good idea of the impact of rising energy costs and climate change when they come around knocking on our doors in possibly 2 years' time.
That gives us lots of time to formulate good questions, to put them to them when they do arrive at the door with their election pamphlets and all their promises.
Yes, and they'd be promising public transport, the Dart to Killarney, maybe by then. If they think we have, they'll give us credibility about their approach to climate change. Well, David, we are getting close to our time up, so perhaps you would wrap up by telling us why you've chosen to next to closing hymn, Holy is the Seed Time, and maybe should wrap up by praying with us.
Well, Holy is the Seed Time is one of my favourite harvest hymns. It speaks of thanksgiving and hope and looking to the future, written by Margaret Ann Headlam. And it's the last stanza that I'll use to pray with you. And thank you, Martin, for the opportunity to talk about creation and the environment today. The last stanza goes like this. Glory to the Father who has seen our need. Glory to the Saviour who has sown the seed. Glory to the Spirit giving the increase. Glory as it has been, is, and shall not cease.
Well, thanks very much, David, for your interesting and challenging discussion of how we as church, in churches and as individuals, to take more responsibility, to be good stewards of our planet. Let us hopefully take on board what you've said, and each one of us take that small step that begins the long march to reducing our emissions and ultimately to climate justice, to make this planet a place where everyone can live in safety, free from hunger, free from fear, and caring for our environment. Thank you, the studio team in Dublin South FM, for their work in facilitating the programme. And we close, as David said, with the hymn, Holy is the Seed Time.